The OUHK's Research Institute for Bilingual Learning and Teaching holds regular seminars and workshops led by distinguished professors in the field of bilingual education. In this inaugural seminar, Li Wei, Professor of Applied Linguistics at University College London, spoke on Translanguaging as a theory of language, some conceptual and methodological considerations. Professor Li explained in detail the concept of translanguaging, which can be studied from both a bilingual pedagogical perspective and a socio-cultural perspective. He also elaborated on how the fundamental distinction between translanguaging and code-switching provides different insights into bilingualism.
So, in this presentation, I'm going to basically make an argument for translanguaging as a theory of language. It's a specific theory of language. It's a specific practice-based theory of language. I want to talk a little bit about the theoretical motivations of proposing this idea of translanguaging, and the methodological challenges in applying the concept in real analysis. And what can be gained by adapting the translanguaging perspective as compared to other terms and other perspectives, for example, code switching. Now, just a very quick review of the history or the development of the notion of translanguaging. There are two rather different routes to translanguaging. One is the bilingual pedagogical route, bilingual education and bilingual teaching and learning. The other comes from socio-cultural theory, which is not entirely unrelated to language education. It actually is very closely related to language education, but it is nevertheless a socio-cultural theory, and also from linguistic anthropology. And that's the languaging route. So people who are using the concept of translanguaging actually come from quite different traditions and different disciplinary background. The notion of translanguaging isn't our invention, definitely not my invention, and actually isn't the invention of the vast majority of people who are using it. It is Colin Baker's English translation of a term coined by a Welsh scholar, Can Williams, in his PhD thesis, which was written in Welsh. I won't try to pronounce the Welsh term. Initially, Colin Baker, in his textbook Foundations of Bilingual Education, Bilingualism, translated or created an English kind of word, translinguifying, and of course it's not so catchy. And later on, in a later edition, he coined the word translanguaging based on the term languaging. Basically, Can Williams was using the term to describe, he never used the term translanguaging. And that's where Colin Baker, who supervised the PhD, had the idea. He used the term to describe a pedagogical practice in Welsh schools or schools in Wales, where the language in education policy determines that the teaching has to be or should be in Welsh. But of course, there's no real monolingual Welsh speaker, and the majority of learners are Welsh-English bilingual and increasingly English-dominant bilinguals. So you end up with a situation where the teacher would teach or try to teach in Welsh, but the pupils would respond and do other activities in the classroom in English. So you have an input-output in two different languages. But of course, it can be practiced both by the student and the teacher in both directions. Now, this initially was viewed extremely negatively, as in many situations in bilingual education, bilingual classroom management in particular. Management has an idea, the simpler the better. You know, one thing at a time, and everybody does the same, that's easy to manage. You don't want diversity. You definitely don't want innovation. So when you have two different languages competing for different purposes and functioning in different ways in the same classroom, then you have something that is challenging the standard, challenging the norm. And Kevin Williams' study tried to demonstrate the benefits of this bilingual practice. Rather than viewing it as a problem, as a deficit, he made the argument, a theoretical argument, that translanguaging, as practiced in the Welsh English classrooms, helped to maximize the learner's bilingual ability in learning, and really showed the benefit of that. Of course, it's not just in bilingual education. In modern language learning, foreign language education, there is the constant debate for generations, the role of L1. Yeah, somehow we've all been taught that we must forget about our mother tongue, our native language, when we learn a foreign language, additional language. Yeah, forgetting that the whole purpose of learning a foreign language is to become bilingual rather than become another monolingual. We don't learn English in order to forget our Chinese or some other native languages. So this is really to remind us of the goal of second, foreign, and additional language education, whatever the situation may be. The goal of learning a second or foreign or an additional language is to achieve bilingualism and multilingualism, not to replace our first language. Yet the bilingual and multilingual language user is rarely used as a model in second, foreign, or additional language teaching. So the norm that we typically use in second, foreign, additional language education is a monolingual native speaker, totally imagined. Somehow this native speaker model can only speak one language and can only speak the most standard variety of that language. So there is a disconnection between language teaching and learning and the vast amount of research over decades, which is kind of done separately, on bilingualism and multilingualism. So people talk about the possibility of a multilingual turn in language education. There's lots of really interesting arguments and publications in the last 5 to 10 years. Second language acquisition for the 21st century really tries to recognize the bilingual and multilingual turn. Now, what this vast amount of research on bilingualism, multilingualism has demonstrated is the basis of bilingual knowledge, how bilinguals acquire, process, represent, and use their languages. We have also rich evidence and very extensive evidence of the multilingual practices that most of us engage in our everyday life, in the real world situation, including multilingual learning. Increasingly, we're not learning additional languages as a monolingual. We're actually already, the majority of learners nowadays are born in bilingual, multilingual families and communities, and they are adding more languages through their learning. So what do we know and what have we been told about this bilingual knowledge? Well, we know there's no such thing as perfectly balanced bilingual. We don't need to know equal amount of English, Chinese, Japanese, French, or whatever. And there's certainly, there are all sorts of models trying to represent the bilingual knowledge in the human brain or human mind. There's very fancy models. But the basic fact is the human brain that works for a monolingual, a bilingual, and multilingual is exactly the same. Bilinguals are not like that, have two separate brains. They're all the same brain areas for language, for any language, any number of languages as well. So this is an argument, a very simple but powerful argument that the psychologist François Grosjean made in the 80s. Bilinguals are not two monolinguals in one brain. And there is the myth that bilinguals somehow are perfect and balanced language users with full proficiencies in all their languages. That's just a total myth. And no one can learn the entire language system, whether it's the first or second or foreign. Yeah, even when we talk about our first language, our native language, we don't know every single word in that language. We don't know every single expression of that language. We don't even know what we might say and how we say it in the next sentence. That's the whole point of linguistic capacity and competence. This is the innovation and linguistic creativity. No one knows the entire language system, even if it's native or mother tongue. And this is why we say language learning is a truly lifelong learning experience. Yeah? So we always can gain new vocabulary, new ways of expressing ourselves. So the bottom line of the so-called bilingual knowledge is that bilinguals and multilinguals rarely have equal proficiency in all the languages they know and use, even the so-called simultaneous bilinguals, even if you are born into a bilingual family exposed to two languages simultaneously. Bilinguals and multilinguals rarely use all their languages equally in all their contexts and to equal level. They just simply don't need that. Knowing which language to use, to whom, and when is an integral part of being bilingual and multilingual. And bilinguals and multilinguals move between what Grosjean calls the language mode. So sometimes they appear to be monolingual. For example, I'm giving this talk in English only or mainly, but the other languages that I know do play a role. It may not be visible on surface. How that impacts on my ability to make a presentation in English only is something that research can demonstrate. In the meantime, we have plenty of evidence on the bilingual, multilingual practice side, not just the knowledge side, that code switching is a defining behavior of being bilingual and multilingual. That is, they are in a bilingual and multilingual mode. Yeah? If you meet somebody, the only way you can tell that person is a bilingual or multilingual is when you hear them engage in code switching. Yeah. If they only speak one of the languages, you don't have evidence to say. You might have a guess that they might, because they're from a certain country or from a certain background, you might be able to guess that they should, in principle, know more than one language, but only when they are engaged in code switching, switching between languages, will have real evidence that they are bilingual and multilingual. So that's the defining feature. Code switching is about the management of different languages in social interaction, the most important aspects of bilingual knowledge, and putting that knowledge to practice. Code switching is really important. And code switching contributes to the building of the cognitive reserve that ultimately brings benefits to bilingual, multilingual language users. There's such a vast amount of discussion and public discourse, news reports about the possible cognitive benefits of being bilingual. It may delay dementia. It may even prevent heart attack. Some are, totally evidence-free, but nevertheless, it attracts a lot of public notice. When you ask people like Alan Bialystok exactly what contributes that potential cognitive benefits, what brings the benefits? She would say the cognitive reserve bilinguals and multilinguals built over the years. And what helps to build that reserve? Code switching. If you are bilingual, but you keep your languages completely separate, then it's not going to help you. It's an exercise that we'll have to do all the time. You exercise in your mind, and code switching actually helps to build that cognitive reserve, and the long-term benefit would be visible. Now, years ago, a leading scholar from Belgium, Hugo Batten-Spearsmore, wrote an article called "Who's Afraid of Bilingualism?" And in it, he talked about the parental fear of bilingualism, the teachers' fears, the cultural fears, the societals, and institutional fears of bilingualism. All these fears apply specifically to code switching. There is no other phenomena or behavior character in being a bilingual that are causing so much concern. Yeah. People are quite happy for other people to be bilingual and multilingual as long as you keep the languages fairly separate. Yeah, they really don't like the idea of mixing them together. So there is the monolingual and linguistic purism ideology, the one language only or one language at a time ideologies permeating through education, through teaching English to speakers of other languages, from modern foreign language education, English medium instruction, content language integrated learning. All these areas have been really influenced by the monolingual ideology and linguistic purism, and now, of course, being challenged by the research on multilingualism. So, before looking at the added value of translanguaging over code switching, it's a rather different tradition from the concept of translanguaging. I want to look at the other source of the notion of translanguaging. That is the socio-cultural theory. So far, I've just been talking about the education and bilingual pedagogical origin of the term translanguaging. Now, there has been a psycholinguistic notion of languaging for some time. It refers to the process of using language to gain knowledge, to make sense, to articulate one's thought, and to communicate about using language. So it's a kind of meta-linguistic commentary or meta-languaging. We do languaging all the time. For example, when we hear somebody saying something in a very interesting way, we kind of slightly pause and say, that's a really interesting way of saying it. And we also learn about new ways of expressing ideas through that kind of noticing. And this, again, has been researched for decades by psychologists, by linguists, and by education specialists. So making metalinguistic commentary, which psychologists or psycholinguists call languaging, is a common feature in everyday language use. It's nothing about bilingual or multilingual. So the languaging tradition wasn't really concerned with bilinguals or multilinguals. It was concerned to some extent with language learning, but it's really not from the bilingualism tradition. It is connected to Pete Becker's attempt to move away from languaging, the concept of language as a noun or something that has been achieved or accomplished already, to languaging as a verb and an ongoing process. That's why Becker called it languaging, to really make it a verb. And languaging emphasizes the importance of problem solving, knowledge construction, mobilization, and above all, learning. So it's a process of solving problems through language and constructing new knowledge and learning new knowledge. So from this tradition, the emphasis is slightly different from the bilingual pedagogical tradition. Here, translanguaging is not an object or a label for describing structural phenomena. It is a practice and a process. So it's very different approach to code switching. Code switching is a term to describe a phenomena or an object. You identify something and you call it code switching. I'll come back to that in a minute. But for translanguaging, we're not describing anything. It's not a descriptive tool. We're not identifying an object. It's about a process that involves different languages, language varieties, and other cognitive systems. But more importantly, it is a process of knowledge construction that makes use of but goes beyond languages. And this is the crucial bit that I'm going to spend a bit more time in a minute. It concerns effective communication, function rather than form, cognitive activity, as well as language production. In many ways, language production, the way we produce speech and writing, is the least important in the notion of translanguaging. But I want to say a few more words about the difference between translanguaging and code switching. Most importantly, what is the added value of having a new term or a different term, which is not aimed to replace code switching at all. There are linguists who are really unhappy with us using the notion of translanguaging, using the term of translanguaging, especially when we argue translanguaging is an alternative theory of language. They actually say, well, everything you are describing can be accounted for by the term of code switching. But the problem with that is code switching is never intended as a theory of language. It makes assumptions about language and basically accepts there are different languages. Now that's an important theoretical and empirical question. And the starting point of people working on translanguaging and the starting point of people working on code switching are quite different. Code switching has implications for theorizing and conceptualizing what language is, but it doesn't say anything explicit. The assumptions code switching makes about language basically starts with the point that you have to accept the existence of different languages as discrete structural entities or grammars. If you don't accept that or have doubts about that, then you can't do code switching. When you do code switching, you first of all have to identify how many languages are involved in this data and what are those languages. And you accept there are differences between these languages as well. Now, of course, there are critical linguists who would say, well, where exactly does English begin and German stops, kind of, and there's lots of jokes where you've just changed some letters, it looks just like the same language, really. The identification of different languages is the very first step of doing code switching analysis. And the discussion of structural integration is based on the assumption of segregation. You have to be able to separate them first. Otherwise, you can't really talk about structural integration. You have to recognize there are different languages, structurally speaking, and then you say in the code-switched utterance, how do they integrate with each other? But the grammatical approaches remain rather conflicting and confusing. Basically, there is the argument that we don't really need any code-switching specific grammatical constraints. UG can explain everything. The minimalist program can explain everything. But the minimalist program, especially UG, is about universal grammar. It's not about natural languages. It's not about specific languages. The whole argument of it is the grammar is universal. It applies to all languages, but it can't apply to individual languages because it's innate and all the rest of it. So there is a bit of a logical muddle. So UG which is meant to be for I language, quite often is employed to explain languages in code switching research. That said, I'm not of the view that there are no such thing as different languages. There are, of course, critical sociolinguists especially who really argue the other extreme. And also, I'm of the view that the concept of code switching has a place in research, especially in psycholinguistic and neurolinguistic research, where control, separation are quite important issues. And I also continue to use it in my own work with psychologists, especially the current work on the cognitive control process model for code switching. And it is possible that it's also useful as a concept in other disciplines, and there are people using the notion of code switching in music, in management, in gender and sexuality studies, and also in general communication. There is a kind of self-help book called Code Switching. It's really about kind of gender and power, which has nothing to do with linguistic code switching. But the added value in terms of having a different term, translanguaging. Well, we really want to introduce a paradigm shift, as it were, to move away from the traditional focus on structural constraints and separation of language and linguistic structures to a more integrated and integrational approach to bilingual speech and bilingual multilingual practices. And we also want to go beyond the narrow conceptualization of what language is. These are the crucial objectives of introducing the notion of translanguaging. So we're not so concerned about separating and identifying which language exactly is one using right now in the bilingual interaction. But of course, we know that in standard research paradigm, especially in psycholinguistics, the ability to separate languages by bilinguals is used as a benchmark of their linguistic competence. And we see that as a bit of a problem. And maybe a practical methodological problem, that is, we haven't been able to design tasks in the lab to get bilinguals to create new structures in an integrated way. Nevertheless, it's a bit of a problem. For those of us who use translanguaging, the identity and identification of languages, different languages, is only relevant when the user deliberately manipulates them. Yeah? So it's a very different approach to code switching. Code switching starts by identifying them. Bilinguals and multilinguals, when they're speaking or listening, they're not thinking which language am I speaking or thinking or producing or hearing right now or in this chunk. And next sentence, which language should I use? We don't think that way. We just think multilingually. Yeah? But there are occasions when it is relevant because you do a bit of a conversational repair or repeat something in a different language. When you hit a problematic spot that somehow what you have said just now hasn't quite come through to the other speaker. Now that's when you manipulate the boundaries between languages, so we are fully aware of the existence of different languages. It's not that we are not aware of that. We just don't think in one language only kind of way. In translanguaging, the proficiency in individual languages is almost irrelevant. Instead, it's the knowledge of how to make best use of all the resources available and question why some resources are not available. Those are very different questions from code switching research. And that's why, when I get a bit annoyed by repeated questioning of what's the difference between code switching and translanguaging, I say there's no relation. They're quite different. The starting points are very different. Nevertheless, they are connected, of course. So translanguaging is not simply a process of going between languages. Code switching is about between linguistic structures. But beyond language, it's the transcending. It's not the transfer or transference that we're talking about. It's the transcending. The trans bit needs to be understood in a different way. It challenges the conventional understanding of language boundaries. Yeah. With its emphasis on meaning making and knowledge construction, it also challenges the boundaries between language and other cognitive systems as separately encapsulated systems or modules. And this is the modularity of mind hypothesis. There is no other theoretical hypothesis that is more fundamental and crucial to modern linguistics. Yeah. If we can say something about the modularity of mind hypothesis, those people who believe in it don't call it a hypothesis, but it really is a hypothesis, then we have something to say about modern linguistics. So in a fairly recent article published last year, which is rather controversial, received a lot of attention and responses from all sorts of quarters, Ortegi, Garcia, and Reed talked about idiolects. Now, idiolects has been there for generations in linguistics. That's where linguistics began. Basically, a person's linguistic repertoire as produced by an individual. It's a unique personal language a person produces, but it has a mental grammar. It emerges from interaction with other speakers and enables that person's usage of language. An idiolect is a structured list of lexical and grammatical features, and you can do serious linguistic analysis. But it is also a knowledge of the social conventions of using these features. And they're talking about bilingual's idiolect would consist of lexical and grammatical features from different socially and politically defined languages, just as a monolingual's idiolect would consist of lexical and grammatical features from regional and social class-wise and stylistically differentiated varieties of the same language. So when we say we know Chinese, we're all Chinese speakers, we are aware of the dialectal differences, the social style differences, social economic class differences as well, the formal, the informal varieties. And a bilingual's idiolect would consist of these varieties, but from different socially and politically defined languages. And languages are, after all, socially, politically defined constructs. Translanguaging means using one's idiolect, one's entire linguistic repertoire, transcending the socially and politically defined language labels or boundaries. Ultimately, it aims to question, not necessarily challenging just yet, but raise some questions about two rather fundamental issues in modern linguistics and linguistic theory. One is about language evolution. Where did these named languages come from? We kind of know English was used by the Anglo-Saxons invading England fairly recently in 450 AD. But they were speaking Germanic dialects or varieties or languages. Now those languages only became English because the first word, English, only appeared around 800 AD. So there is currently a whole debate about the term indigenous versus immigrant languages. In some sense, all languages are immigrant languages. There's no such thing as purely indigenous language. It just doesn't make much sense. But fundamentally, we are raising questions about the human mind and the human brain. Do we speak in specific named languages? This is not challenging the Chomskyan theory of language at all. In many ways, it is providing an alternative theoretical argument for that kind of universal approach, although there are also issues that we don't quite agree on. We don't think when we are speaking either as a monolingual or a multilingual, we are thinking which language we need to be using first. That's not the priority for us. We don't think that way. Related to that, although rather different, is the modularity of mind hypothesis. So we are asking a number of questions. Is language a separate and discrete module in the human mind in relation to other cognitive systems such as memory, attention, emotion, etc.? Of course, when Fodor et al. Promoted the idea of modularity of mind, they made it very clear language is a separate module. It's completely different from memory, attention, and emotion. And you can kind of see the misuse of that hypothesis in practice. In foreign language learning, we try to get away from memory. Anything to do with rote learning is wrong, is negative. It's kind of strange, and you don't kind of pay much attention to emotional aspects or the affective aspects of language learning. But of course, things are changing. There is a huge amount of interest in foreign language learning and emotion. Now, we're also asking if the human mind does not divide different languages or between language and other cognitive systems, should bilingualism and multilingualism research be focused on how the language users use multiple linguistic and cognitive resources in combination or in orchestration in social interaction rather than which and how many languages they use and they know and use? What role do sense and modality play in the processes of language learning and language use? So this is the kind of modularity of mind hypothesis. Somehow these modules are all separated. There is, in fact, plenty of empirical evidence, not from us, but from neurologists and psychologists, to confirm there's no such thing as a language-only brain area. Language learning cannot be wholly independent of auditory and visual processes. So language experience and cognitive capacities are closely interrelated and mutually beneficial. So language is a multisensory and multimodal semiotic system interconnected with each other with other identifiable but inseparable cognitive systems. So the way we process color, the way we process number involves language, but it also involves memory, attention, lots of other things. Yeah, what we're doing right now is a multimodal, semiotic communication experience. It's not just language, and it's certainly not just speech and writing. Translanguaging means transcending the traditional divides between language and non-language cognitive and semiotic systems. And human communication in everyday life is always multilingual, multimodal, and multisensory. And language learning is also a multisensory and multimodal experience. The multilingual, multimodal, and multisensory processes are dimensions of the same process and experience. This is the most important argument of translanguaging. Different dimensions, but it's the same process. It's not, here is the memory bit, here's the attention bit, here's the emotion bit, and here's the language bit. Yeah, you can't separate them. You can identify them, but you can't separate them. Yeah, they're not separate processes happening on their own. But this is kind of, again, not our own invention, as it were. It follows a trend of linguistic research. There is a whole line of argument from the language instinct idea to interactional instinct idea. Where does language instinct come from? How do we trigger that? In order to become a social animal, the interaction with other people, the desire, the drive to interact with other people is the most important instinct. So you have the interactional instinct idea. There are 2 books on that with the same title, and that has been argued is at the root of human sociality. And of course, in our book Translanguaging, we argue for a translanguaging instinct. So basically, we're arguing human beings have the natural or innate translanguaging instinct. It's an innate capacity to draw on as many different cognitive and semiotic resources as available to them to interpret meaning, intentions, and to design actions accordingly. We try to draw as many different cognitive and semiotic resources as possible, and that is our innate capacity to do that together in orchestration. And that drives human beings to go beyond narrowly defined linguistic cues and transcend, again, transbit means transcend, the culturally defined language boundaries to achieve effective communication. So this is all linked in with Wei Cook's idea of multi-competence, but also Claire Cram's idea of symbolic competence. So here is a sign. Some people may have seen it because I just noticed it on the street in a little town in Taiwan one mornings. And here is a highly multilingual sign. When I noticed it, and I took a picture of it because it violates all the grammatical rules of code switching. In the code switching literature, we were told that you can't switch the be verb or apostrophe as the possessive marker or any of the functional system morphemes. So this person, whoever created this, clearly knows the rules to violate. So you have a Japanese possessive marker, and you have the English is. These are the words in code switching you're not supposed to switch. But of course, the key head noun in this thing, in this structure, is represented by a picture. Yeah. But of course, what it brings is not simply multilingual and multimodal. There's multilingual and multimodal, multisemiotic as well. But the cultural history of Taiwan is here as well. We know for a fact it was once a Japanese colony, and Japanese, of course, is still present in the public domain. Yeah. But there is deeper, and for those of you who knows the reading of Japanese, I think the word 水果 in Chinese, there is at least one reading of it, which sounds very much like 西瓜, 西瓜. It's really complicated design of it. This was in the shop. So there is still the same today's, it doesn't have the fruit bit, but there is the cut bit is really interesting. There are repeated cut in English. Is it the cut price or is it the cut pineapple? It's not the whole pineapple they're selling. It's the cut pineapple. But it is actually both. So there are lots of readings. I don't have time to go into it. But you can see these simple signs requires multilingual, multi-sensory, and multimodal readings. And only through the coordination and orchestration of these cues can we understand. This is from our current project, social media kind of interaction, digital interchange. This is Polish, English, but lots of pictures. And this is very typical of current day digital communication. We don't really go by with words only. So basically, translanguaging emphasizes the interconnectedness between the traditionally and conventionally understood languages and other human communication systems. The trans prefix emphasizes the fluid practices that go beyond socially constructed language systems. That's the first trans bit. And the second trans bit is the transformative capacity of translanguaging practices, not only for the language systems, but also for the individual's cognitive and social structures. And the third trans dimension is the consequence of reconceptualizing, rethinking language and language learning and language use for linguistics, psychology, sociology, and education altogether. As I said earlier, bilinguals and multilinguals are aware of the existence of the boundaries, and they can strategically employ the boundaries or manipulate the boundaries. So the boundaries are equally important. And by having language in the term translanguaging, we highlight the grammaticality and systematic nature of communication with multiple semiotic resources as well. The concept of translanguaging space is associated with the whole concept of translanguaging. There are three concepts: translanguaging as a general concept, translanguaging instinct, and translanguaging space. So really, just a very quick summary. The key argument we're trying to make here is language users make full use of their multilingual and multimodal resources, however truncated or mobile they may be. They use them creatively to push boundaries. In doing so, they not only show their language awareness in the structural and cognitive sense, but also their political, social, and cultural sense and sensitivities. So through translanguaging, their knowledge of the world, relationships with others, and their own subjectivities are transformed, and the transformative nature of it. So we're seeing a paradigm shift from researching translanguaging as a phenomena to translanguaging research. Take it as a completely different research perspective. And this perspective aims to reconceptualize language as a multilingual, multimodal, multisensory system of meaning-making resources. Yeah, whatever people can use to make meaning, that's what we call a language. And it transcends the conventional boundaries between languages and between language and other cognitive and semiotic systems. That's a crucial challenge we want to present to the whole modularity of mind hypothesis. It also highlights the individual's potential for creativity and criticality, and transforms our way of thinking and the divides between multilingualism, multiculturalism, multicompetence. These have traditionally been researched by people from different disciplinary backgrounds, but we really want to bring these together. Thank you very much.